So I'm going to show you how to use the Bennett. It's a form of IPPB. We have 2 machines like this in Craigavon. It's probably the oldest ones that we have, and probably the most simple ones. The setup of it should be set up by the physio assistants whenever you go to get it, but if you do need to set it up, it's fairly straightforward. You have the oxygen port at the top that fits on here. You have a smaller one that fits on the bottom, the expiration port, and then you have a wider one that fits on the bottom also that goes to the patient. The filter must always be attached here, and if you are using the machine with a COVID patient, you must put another filter at the other end, at the patient end as well, so you can put it in there. So you can see your tubing coming out here. Then the back of this is your oxygen connection. The Bennett is driven by oxygen, so it must be connected into an oxygen port in the wall. I've got a cylinder here, although it's empty at the minute, but I'll just show you then how it actually connects. So this would be the oxygen port in the wall on the ward, and it connects in like so. It will make a bit of a noise, a bit of a whoosh noise whenever that happens, but it's say this is empty at the minute, so it's not running properly, but that's how it works. There's a mouthpiece at the end of the tubing. It can be used with a mask also. Most of the time we would use this with a mouthpiece because most patients that are working with you will be able to hold it in their mouth. So to turn the machine on as such, there's not an on-off button. You're just going to turn the dial at the top to get the oxygen to run through. You turn it around really until you'll see and you'll hear the oxygen running through the nebulizer, and you'll hear it coming, or you see it coming at the other end. You will put some saline, 2.5 or 5 mils of saline in the bottom part here of the nebulizer. So just open it and put your saline in to run it. And when it's turned on, you'll see the saline being nebulized and a fine mist coming out the end, and that's it on. It can run with either 100% oxygen or 40% oxygen, according to whether you pull in or push out this little knob here. So it tells you on this, pull out is 100% and push in air dilution, which is about 40%. On the front of the machine then, there are 2 dials. Here you set the control pressure, so you will use this one to turn it and set the control pressure. It won't go up at the minute because there's no oxygen running through it, but you will set the control pressure here. You can read the theory. Most of the time we will set it around 12 to begin with, and then you will increase it as the patient can tolerate or as you feel is appropriate. When the patient's using the machine, then the pressures that they reach will be shown on the patient system pressure here, and you'll see what it's going up to. What's also good in this machine is a little trigger button here. So you can take this little plastic cover off, and if the patient cannot initiate the trigger, you can't change the sensitivity of the machine, but the therapist can actually flick this up. And more commonly, patients often can't actually trigger the expiration, so then you can flick it down if you need to. I'm going to show you how to use the Alpha machine, which is another form of IPPB, a more modern version than the Bennett. This one, unlike the Bennett, you don't actually have to plug into the wall with the oxygen, but it's an electrical piece of equipment, so it goes in just with a socket and gets turned on. At the back here then is the on-off switch. So it goes on at the back here. It makes a bit of a noise to begin with, and then will be silent. So I'm going to run through just how it's set up to begin with. Very similar to the Bennett, the circuit's the same. You have a wide bore tubing that fits in here with a filter. You've got, and 2 other bits of tubing. So they only really fit on the one way. So you can see the wider one, that's to the nebulizer. So that runs through to drive the nebulizer. And then the one that's narrower at this end is the expiratory port. So just like the Bennett, but just set up slightly differently. Again, we use a filter here. Ordinarily, at the minute, we would plan, if we're using these with COVID-19 patients, that we would also put a filter at the other end. So you would just take it off and put it at the patient end also. So you can see the circuit, and you've got the nebulizing unit, you've got the expiratory port, and then up at the top here, you have an oxygen port. So whilst it doesn't run on oxygen, you can add oxygen into this, or you can just use it in room air. So it may just look like this when it's set up to begin with. And if you want to entrain oxygen, there are oxygen entrainment ports that are kept in Fort Knox that you can then add into the circuit. So you add it in nearest the patient, so on the other side of the nebulizing unit, nearest the patient. You then have got a little port here, and you just run it with fine bore tubing to the wall into your flow meter. So you just attach it at the end here and run it into the flow meter. I'll take it off for now, just so it doesn't pull. Whenever you're putting the oxygen in, it's really the same as you would calculate for nasal spec. So 1 litre is about 24%, 2 litres is about 28%, and so on. And you really titrate your oxygen depending on what the patient is on to begin with, or how they cope, or how their sats go whenever you're using the machine. So that's the setup of it. What is also important to remember is the order that you turn the oxygen on. Because this is an electrical piece of equipment, you don't want oxygen running while you turn it on because of the potential for a spark and then the potential for fire with the oxygen running. So you always turn the machine on first, then turn the oxygen on the wall, then afterwards you turn the oxygen off and then turn the machine off. So it's a bit like an oxygen sandwich. So you always do the machine first, then the oxygen, and then the reverse on the way out. So you're never flicking an electrical switch with the oxygen running. This one looks a little more complicated than the Bennett does, but you just break it down into the little buttons that are here. So this one with the arrow is really just the start of the trigger. You only need to use this if the patient cannot trigger it themselves. The way it's running currently, if there was, unlike the Bennett, it doesn't run constantly. So when there's saline in here, you'll not hear a whoosh, or you'll not see a mist to begin with. It will only nebulize while the patient's breathing. So you will, when they put it in their mouths and they form a seal around the mouthpiece and they initiate a breath in, then you'll see the nebulizer working. But if they cannot do that, you can actually start it yourself by pressing this. And it will, that's them inspiring now. Now, eventually it will time out again. I'll just flick it off and on again for now so it's not noisy. I guess the one thing I feel that is missing from this is you can't actually, like the Bennett where you can flick an expiration, you can't flick an expiration on this. So if they can't, if their cheeks are blown up and they can't expire, you have to just take it out of their mouths. And if you can somehow block this on the bed or with your finger, then it will eventually expire as well. So these buttons here, the trigger of inspiration, what's nice in this machine is you can change how hard it is for them to trigger the inspiration. The scale goes from -1 to, if it's coming up locked, you have to press the unlock button. Oh, a bit longer, that's it. So then you press, you can go from minus to plus. There is not always a rhyme or reason as to how this works, as in what you think. You're making it a bit harder. If you make it more minus, it's harder to pull. But it doesn't always seem to correlate with the patient. So I generally start quite low, or maybe around -3, -4, and then just change it and adapt it as to how your patient manages. If they cannot trigger it, make it a bit easier. But sometimes it blows up too quickly, so sometimes you can make it harder. So really just find that there's no right or wrong, just find the level that works. The next one then, the expiratory pressure, that's like your dial on the Bennett, and it goes up from 0 to 40. So again, you're maybe starting off at 12 to 15 to begin with, seeing how the patient copes with it and increasing it as the patient manages or as you feel is appropriate for them to get the right expansion. This little dial here is resistance of expiration. So this is how hard it is for them to blow out. And it's quite sort of arbitrary. There's no numbers involved. It is just from minus to plus, so easier to harder. And again, you just turn it until it works for the patient. If it's cutting out too quick or they feel they need to breathe out harder, you can just make it a bit harder. If you feel they can't breathe out against it, you can make it a bit easier. So it is really just play around until it works for your patient. What's also nice with this machine is that you can change the flow. This is the litres per minute here. So you can change it on the scale. It goes from, let me see, 8 until 60 litres per minute. I don't think I've ever used it that high. Probably around 30 I would tend to use it. This is the one I probably adjust most to get a nice, decent breath, because this determines how fast the air or the oxygen is coming at them. When the patient then uses the machine, they will be able to see, you'll be able to see the pressure they're reaching along here. And you will also be able to see their tidal volume. So for a patient that is able to interact and is able to understand, it's quite nice to bring the machine in front of them, show them it, and they can see the tidal volume they're achieving. And hopefully then you get it set right for them, and they'll be able to see how their tidal volume can increase. And I find that very effective. Once it's set, that usually works for that patient. So if you're using it after somebody, it will stay set at what it was set at, which is helpful. Day to day, obviously, you may have to adjust things, but you tend to find once you have it, it works quite well.